Well, in the US, the Pentagon has marked the close of the 20-year military conflict in Afghanistan, but this is not the end of the story. The US military now says it's considering coordinating with the Taliban to defeat the Islamic State group known as ISIS-K, which carried out an attack at Kabul airport last week, killing scores of people. Well, the US military and diplomatic withdrawal is now fully complete. That's after 20 years in Afghanistan. It now appears that the Americans believe that they're going to try and remove American citizens who are still there through land routes rather than trying to fly them out. After all, they no longer have a military presence in that country. We're joined now by a former BBC Kabul correspondent, now an independent analyst, Karen Allen. Karen, good evening to you. How difficult is it to leave Afghanistan through ground routes? I can't imagine you just get in a car and drive to the nearest highway. It's got to be a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the roads are not necessarily in the best state, but there's obviously the security considerations. And what are your exit routes? Well, you go south, east down into Pakistan, through Pakistan, quite a precarious journey going that way. You go west out of the state of Herat into Iran. Although there's places where those borders are pretty fluid, actually getting to those places and getting from place to place with Afghanistan is not as simple as it might sound. There are a lot of people without not only the physical means to be able to get from one part of the country to another, but actually the financial means as well. I mean, there's a really big situation at the moment where people are not able to even access money to be able to pay someone to be able to transport them across to a border. So huge considerations as well as the geographical ones.
It also depends on the Taliban. We don't know if they would just let people leave. And I realize, as you say, the borders are fluid. It's not as if they're able to secure all the borders. But I mean, there's still that. If you get caught trying to leave, that could also be a problem.
Yeah, and, you know, in situations like this, you know, although some of the checkpoints have come down, Afghanistan, whenever you traveled across before the Taliban were there were already many checkpoints. Most of them were official, but also unofficial checkpoints. Now, given this sort of security vacuum at the moment, although the Taliban say that they are imposing sort of security and they are trying to maintain security, particularly in the capital, one of the biggest threats is actually trying to get through those checkpoints, because what we don't know yet is how much the Taliban are able to control what one might call the rural Taliban, the elements and possibly rogue elements that may want to be extorting money from people who are traveling, or who may want to actually prevent them from traveling and take violent action. So there's a lot of unknowns at the moment. Obviously, you know, for some people, the desire to leave the country is much greater than the potential threat, the potential personal threat to them, and they're prepared to make the journey. But those are some of the obstacles and some of the hazards they're going to face.
It's also not clear what will happen when you get to Pakistan or if you get to Iran, if you will actually be welcome there. I mean, our government has said it will not accept refugees from Afghanistan. Rwanda has said that it will. Uganda has said that it will. But, I mean, it's not clear that Iran and Pakistan would be happy to have you.
No, that's right. I mean, look, there is a lot of, particularly on the Pakistani side, there are a lot of Afghan refugees that were in the camps in Pakistan across the border. And so there are quite a lot of connections for many Afghans to Pakistan, and they may be able to find a route. But even things like basic telecommunications, to be able to inform, say, a relative or someone else across the border that, you know, you want to come across, that is not particularly easy. I've just come off a telephone call just literally about 10 minutes ago to contacts in Afghanistan, where sort of the phone lines, and we're talking about mobile phone lines, are fairly sort of precarious and intermittent in being able to get a signal. Imagine if you're trying to make a call to someone across the border, making a plan to try and evacuate your family. It's fairly precarious, and it's certainly very uncertain.
How difficult now, and I mean, there's a bigger question around this. So the Taliban are now in control as we understand it. But Afghanistan, often described as a multi-ethnic country, is actually quite difficult to govern. How difficult are the Taliban going to find it?
You know, I think it depends where you're talking about. I think in Kandahar, in their natural homeland, which is in the south, yes, that was where the Taliban was born. They will be able to exert their control without too much difficulty. I've just come off the phone to friends that are based in Kabul, and there is a sense that, you know, at the moment, the Taliban who are there have been able to maintain security, and that's one of the biggest considerations. Can they basically ensure that for ordinary men and women and children in Afghanistan, that actually their daily security is ensured? I think where the question comes into play, when there are other elements that can't be controlled, particularly, for example, you know, I've talked to people in Host, which is one of the areas in the far east of the country, where, you know, you have what might be called rural Taliban, where their own vigilante justice may be being meted out. And it's not at all clear how much the Taliban that we're seeing on the news headlines that are involved in the negotiations, how much of those have control of their outer elements. So it's a lot of unknowns at the moment. One thing I can say that I think is quite interesting is I talked to a friend a few minutes ago who's based in Kabul, and he said really for the past few weeks it has been incredibly quiet, apart from the areas leading up to the airport. You know, in the suburbs itself, he said he used to hear gunfire every single night. And this is not a Taliban supporter. This is somebody who has made a decision to stay in Afghanistan for the time being. He's had experience of being in other parts of the world, but he's an Afghan, and he's a proud Afghan, and he wants to remain in his country. And he's made the point quite clearly that, you know, up until the 15th of August, he was hearing gunfire almost every night from 9 o'clock in the evening till the early hours of the morning. Now, that hasn't happened. People are going out there around their business. There are a few shops open. Security seems to be okay in the capital. What's not at all clear is what will happen with the group that's competing with the Taliban, their arch enemies. This is ISIS-K that we talk about, that was responsible for the attacks on the Kabul airport. So how much will the Taliban be able to control those types of elements that potentially could sabotage the current stability that this gentleman that I was speaking to was describing in Kabul? And how much, as I say, in the outer reaches and the other provinces of Afghanistan, security can be maintained as well.
Karen Allen, really do appreciate the time. Thank you. Former BBC Kabul correspondent and analyst, and now really do appreciate the time.